oh, Pilates, that's a woman's thing. If I hear that one more time, I will vomit.
Thanks for coming into the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So as I was kind of talking about before we hit record, a big thing that I'm doing, especially lately, is focusing on injury prevention, mobility, different stuff like that. I saw that you're really active in training in Pilates. So I'm super excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, absolutely.
But before we start going into those specifics, what I am curious about is what's kind of like your sports background?
So my background, actually, I didn't do a ton of like sports in high school or grade school before that. I did play tennis. I did do cross country for a little while. A lot of my background was where I'm at in Georgia is pretty rural. So it was lots of playing outside, that kind of stuff, lots of hiking. And then once I got into high school, I got into, unfortunately, a kind of a bad car wreck. And my junior year, and then my senior year of high school, I started a weightlifting class to kind of help after the car wreck. And that's really kind of where my love of fitness kind of took off. From there, essentially since senior year of high school, I've worked out pretty religiously. There's been a few periods now that I'm in my 30s, college days and stuff where I've gone a little lax, but for the most part, I've maintained working out my entire life.
If you don't mind me asking, like, where did you injure in that car accident?
So that's in that car wreck, I herniated 2 discs in my spine, one in my cervical spine, one in my lumbar. And this kind of jumping forward a little bit, but right when I'd started training in Pilates, I unfortunately got in another pretty bad car wreck with a semi truck, and I herniated 3 more discs in my spine. And I did all of my PT on the reformer or with Pilates.
No kidding. So how many backs have you, or how many discs have you herniated so far? Is that 5? 5. Yeah. So it was 2 the first one, and then 5 different ones in the second
ones the next time. Yeah.
So 3 different ones. Oh yeah, but like total 5.
Yeah, correct.
Oh Lord. So does that did that end up coming with any like permanent damage, or were you able to pretty much train through it?
Cover. So a little bit. The first one actually kind of reversed the curves of my spine. So where your neck kind of curves forward, and same thing with your low back where it kind of curves forward towards the front side of your body. It actually straightened and or kind of curved them the opposite direction. So I did a lot of PT work back when I was in my teens to try and reverse the curves back. And with the second one, it was just lots of migraine headaches and that kind of thing. Again, it flared everything up again. So I've got my neck is pretty straight, which it shouldn't be. And it allows for lots of fun migraines and all kind of other things. If I have to be very careful jumping and stuff like that. If I land incorrectly, my head will move wrong, and because it's impacting on top of a straight spine versus a curved spine, it kind of gives you a little bit of bounce. So it's made me more cautious and cognizant of how I move.
No kidding. So I mean, that's kind of interesting because I'm learning things about the spine just by hearing about that. I assume when you mess something up like that, you quickly have to start learning how your back works, basically.
Oh yeah. And I always tell people, because again, at 17 is when I got in the first car wreck. Every single day I've woken up in some semblance of pain. Once you mess your spine up, to me it's one of the few areas that will never go back together. Like you break your arm or you break a bone and it heals pretty correctly, but the spine is made of so much connective tissue with the disc and the spinal cord and all that. And when you really damage those, they get good again. They just don't go back to as perfect as they were when the accident.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely made things very interesting. Actually, this year, about 6 months ago, so right at the beginning of the year, I first started doing barbell squats for probably the first time in a decade, because before that, I was not, every doctor I talked to had said, never load your spine like that. That's just too much pressure on your spine because these discs are damaged now. But through my training with Pilates and other things, I've been able to build up enough muscular strength to kind of help compensate and brace my spine that I do a very light squat. I bench almost as much as I squat essentially now, but I can do, barbell squats, which is great for the first time.
Okay, yeah, because I hate to bring it up again because I brought it up in my last podcast, but I have a reoccurring back injury that I have, and it's not super severe, but it's something I picked up weightlifting, and it's one of those things that if I get ahead of myself, I don't warm up properly, I don't stretch properly, I can screw it up, and I'm laid up in bed for a week, and it's just misery. And yours sounds a lot worse than mine. What I do has been typically like, because I still do like to do barbell squats, but I do a lot of warm-ups. I'll do like 5 warm-up sets starting at 135, and I'm a big guy. So that looks like it's like a 1 plate net. So I'm like, I hope nobody's looking at this. And then I work it up. What I'm curious about for you to work into a back squat, what is your like preparation routine for that?
So a lot of that goes into doing proper warm-ups. I do essentially full hip and shoulder warm-ups. And then I'll do a little bit of ab work as well. So I do like your hip cars and your shoulder cars, both directions. So where you're rotating the hip joint through its full range of motion, both ways. Same thing with the shoulders, both ways. Then I'll do, I've heard different names of it, essentially stomach vacuuming, to where you can do it, standing if you're really good, but typically you do it kind of bent over and you exhale out all the air. And then it's as if you were taking an inhale, but you vacuum the stomach up. So from above the pelvis to your ribs, you essentially suck that back to your backbone and hold that for a few minutes. And that just really helps to activate your entire core chain. Every single muscle gets activated in that.
That's like an old school bodybuilding technique. I know Arnold was big on the vacuums. That's something that in modern bodybuilding, I don't think a lot of people are doing because they have those big distended bellies. But the old school,
you'll see that their abdominals are kind of protruding versus pulled in like Arnold used to. Which great guy and definitely an inspiration as far as bodybuilding and stuff back in the day. But I'll do those. And then actually when I do squats, and this year it's when I really kind of discovered this set that I do is every time I do a barbell squat, immediately after I do a barbell squat, I'll then grab a 45-pound plate and do a single-sided farmer's carry around my gym so that I've got that plate on one side. I'm having to use my abdominals to really brace myself and keep myself from leaning over. And I'll do that on each side in between every set of squats. And I find that just helps keep my core activated and my mind focused on keeping, that proper alignment and activation through my midsection, that by the time I get back to do my squats again, I can go right into it and I have little to no worry about, relaxing too much or anything that's going to cause any issues with my spine.
No kidding. I never thought about that. So it's actually funny. So in my last podcast, I talked to Sheldon Roberts, who's he's in a Golf Digest top 100 golf trainer, and we started talking about kind of what you were saying about core activation and doing sort of as opposed to what I call linear movements, where you're doing it very symmetrically, like you're doing the same motion on both sides, or squatting on both sides. And then after talking to him talking about rotational sports, he started talking about doing things that were one-sided. And so since I talked to him, I've been integrating a lot of that stuff and noticing little minor differences, but I've been focusing a little more on one-armed movements. And I never thought of doing that in the middle of my leg routine to help reinforce my core. And now that you're talking about that, like every podcast, I'm just going to keep on adding exercises to my thing. I'm going to be in the gym forever at this rate. But what I am curious about, so that, I mean, because when I am lifting legs heavy, I'm not really
Mhm.
giving that much thought to activating what is that really doing? It's activating like your obliques.
Yeah, so your obliques, your transverse abdominis, really everything, the entire core chain, it's helping to keep you, straight up versus when you're holding something on one side. Typically, if we're not paying attention, we'll kind of let our shoulders dip to one side. You're constantly I guess, aligning yourself against that 45-pound weight when you do that single-sided farmer's carry. And to kind of piggyback off of what the last guy was saying, everything now, like, yeah, it is great and it's time saving to do, bench press and all that kind of stuff with a barbell. I've gotten pretty far away from my barbell training simply because I love doing things either single sided, or I love the aspect of how much more stability it takes to do something with a dumbbell in each hand where they're not connected. Just, at Pilates is very much about, starting from your core and then working your way out. And in doing that, you don't really have to think about activating. And, I rarely ever actually do abdominal exercises because I've made now my abdominal exercise part of my larger exercises. So it's part of my squat routine, it's part of my bench press routine, it's part of all these other things. Because instead of necessarily doing 1,000 crunches, I'm using my core when I'm doing a bench press. I'm using my core when I'm doing a farmer's walk, things like that, so that I don't have to sit down and then take extra time to do, planks for 10 minutes and crunches and all that kind of stuff.
That's actually
Not
pretty
to say
cool.
that those aren't good for you, they are, but if you can incorporate it, it shortens your gym time.
Okay, I appreciate that you're not trying to offend the people that do their crunches and their flutter kicks and all that other stuff. That actually, that's, you know what, to me personally, like I'm like doing, like I'll do like the 5 day split of like I'm gonna do legs and shoulders and that whole thing. But at the
Mhm.
end, you're supposed to fit abs somewhere in there, and I never do. And so I'm actually kind of curious. I want you to tell me a little more about, you said that Pilates is all about working from the core outside. What can you tell me about the philosophy behind Pilates, or the history, or like what's a good overview of Pilates?
So kind of a brief history of Pilates is, Joseph Pilates is the guy who created it. And during World War One, he was actually and he's a German, and he was in England traveling with a boxer as the boxer's fitness coach. And Joseph was a real kind of crazy guy. He was a carny. He did everything. He was very interested in a lot of things. Kind of a modern, or I guess a Renaissance man. But when the war broke out, they thought he was a Nazi spy, so they put him in an internment camp on the Isle of Man. And while he was there, he started training some of the other guys in the internment camp. And they didn't really think too much of it until the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, I believe it was, came through. And they noticed that almost every person he trained either didn't get sick, or if they got sick, they got over it pretty quickly. There was very few that had any lasting effect from the flu. So then the guys who were running the camp brought him into a hospital and said, okay, here's 30 patients that are all bedridden. Start exercising them to get them, healthy and get them back out into active duty again. And so he was moving these 30 guys around, moving their legs around, moving their arms around by himself, which, as one would expect, would be pretty tiring every day to be, exercising 30 guys who are bedridden. So that's where he kind of eventually created the first Pilates machine. Is he attached springs that had handles on it to the tops and bottoms of the hospital bed, and gave these guys these handles and created a little routine that they could do themselves using these springs in the hospital bed to do exercise. And that's kind of where Pilates was born. And then his philosophy, as he continued training and everything, it came to, he used the body as you are your core, and your arms and legs are just extensions of your core. So every exercise should always start at your core by properly engaging and or stabilizing or bracing your abdominals for whatever the move that you're about to do with your arms or legs. So essentially, all my students in class, they get tired of me every time I, teach them. I'm telling them, all right, imagine you're putting on your tightest pair of pants. You're sucking your belly in and up. I want you to do that every time we do an exercise. If you blink, if you even think about moving, that's the engagement that I want. And that's kind of where he came up with that philosophy.
Man, I going back to World War One, and then an interesting tie-in to staying healthy in the midst of a pandemic. And I was like, oh, okay, full circle. We just went through that. Actually, you know what is this is kind of a silly aside, but and especially in our little, I don't want to bring up the COVID stuff too much, and I won't, but pre-pandemic, our version of getting sick, obviously we looked at that very differently. And I remember I used to when I was like, oh, I think I have the cold, my first instinct was always, I need to work out more. Like, if I haven't been working out recently, I need to be in the gym, I need to be running, and I'm just gonna sweat it out, and I'm gonna work it out. And that was a strategy that served me quite well, but it also required me to go out into the public sphere, which became, kind of controversial the last couple of years. But that is, I'm totally on board with, I'm still on board with that as an idea. And I think that's pretty cool that was how they fought this, how Mr. What would you say his first name was? Pilates?
Joseph. Joseph Pilates.
Is that how you say it in German? Not I think it's Joseph.
Okay.
Might be Joseph. Joseph Pilates. Yeah, but he that turned out they were the only ones that weren't getting sick, and then they're like, okay, and then of course, he did a little bit of treachery though. He got all those British soldiers healthy again, so they could go back on the front and go back to killing Germans. But some interesting history in there. Do some POW time. So then
there's actually because through my continuing education, I was doing a training last year before now, I can't remember, but there was a study in the training that I was reading that actually kind of corroborates the premise of him training these people and it improving their health, because in the training, if I can remember correctly, essentially it was talking about when you are learning something new, something physically new, you're learning how to move a different way or stuff like that, your cells actually release kind of an antibody that helps fight off infections and stuff like that. And so essentially the act of him teaching these people something that they've never done before is causing their cells to, and their entire cells, not just white blood cells, but all the cells in your body apparently release this antibody that kind of acts as a natural immunity. And so there is a little bit of study that him doing that is what helped these people fight off or not catch the influenza of 1918, is their bodies were naturally building a higher level of immunity than had they just been doing the same exercise routines that they already knew.
No, one of the other things that's kind of interesting to me about that he developed it that long ago was that, we think of weightlifting as really being in its infancy, kind of in the 40s and 50s, when people kind of started thinking about weightlifting, and the fact that he was doing it back in the 1910s, doing this core engagement thing, and it's still something that's used a lot and is still popular today, is pretty interesting. So this, again, I gotta give the disclaimer for both of us. I am not a medical doctor nor a lawyer. I assume you're neither of those. Correct. So anything we say is not medical advice. However, as someone who's been exposed to some back issues, I'm curious on what your take is on something I've been kind of wondering about lately. Is you said that your back, once you mess it up, it's one of those things that never really goes back. Is it? From the back injury that I have, I almost feel like your back, it has a kind of a memory of trauma that it's been through, and that there's, I sort of wonder if But like the other day, I did some floor cleans, and I was like, I did it, and I was like, I felt fine. But then the next day, I was thinking about going and doing some squats, and then I was like, kind of feeling my back. And I was like, I think I should take an extra day off from that.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things. And I'm not sure what your philosophy is on the memory of your back.
Kind of very similar. But I kind of always take things as a two-prong approach. If my back is really out of whack, like last night I didn't sleep well, my neck's kind of feeling a little bit out of alignment. I will definitely rest and be a little bit easier on my neck, but I do always encourage a little bit of movement. That's where a lot of times, and again, I am not a medical doctor, never have I been. I do disagree a lot of times with a lot of medical doctors, especially with a lot of my clients that will come in and they'll have an injury and they'll be like, oh, you need to not move that area for 6 months. That's not doing them any good at all. I'm sorry, I absolutely hate that. Yes, should they be careful with that area? Absolutely. But to not move a part of your body that should be moving every single day for 6 months, that all that's going to do is atrophy the area. It's going to cause the joint to, stiffen and lock up. And I think that's utter BS. So I'm very much, going back to my own spine, one of the forms of cardio that I've gotten into in the past year, which out of everything, I'd rather lift weights, work flexibility training, work abs, do anything but cardio. Cardio is about the bane of my existence. But I had hurt my back, and I decided to get on the stair mill and just nice and slow walk stairs. That has been a godsend for my back, and just that little bit of movement. So that's kind of my philosophy. Anytime anyone hurts themselves, I do recommend they take it easier on the area, but don't not move the area. All that's going to do is, again, cause it atrophy, cause it to stiffen. You want to keep a little bit of movement so that the blood is flowing through. It's bringing fresh blood and oxygen to the area to help it heal, and to help it regenerate.
Yeah, that's been exactly my experience too, is when I'm feeling my back. Actually, typically when I'm starting to feel my back really tense up, it's typically because I'm not lifting weights. I'm not doing any back exercises at all. And if I go, a couple of, like maybe a month like that, it really starts tensing up, and I start getting really miserable. But if I start just doing some movements, and I feel like that's kind of similar to you, of like, you got into what exercising almost as a survival thing, just to, you're finding an area that's your weakness and you're making it your strength. You're like, I've got to do this. I've got to put my body through something in order to just make it functional. Otherwise, it's just like you said, it's just going to atrophy, and you're going to be in a lot of pain.
At 17, they were like, oh, you can see how you're going to do, or we highly recommend back surgery. And at 17, I was like, no, you're not cutting into my spine. And I've had over the years, through my last accident I had about 5 or 6 years ago now. Again, they were like, well, you've herniated some more discs. We highly recommend, let's go in, let's fuse and, some vertebrae together and all that. And I was like, no, you're not doing that. I will do my own PT. I'd rather work on it myself than have someone cut in. Not to say that, again, there aren't certain aspects or times where that is necessary, but mine, I knew well enough after going through it again that I was like, no, you're not about to cut into me.
Yeah, just the idea of like going in and you start saying fusing bones, and I'm like, no, oh my God, that sounds scary. Were you a trainer before the last car wreck?
Yeah. So about 12 years ago now, I got into personal training. Essentially after college, I got into personal training, and bodybuilding, actually, back in my early 20s. And have always kind of kept up with that. Went back to college and thought I wanted to do something else. But personal training has always been kind of my side gig. I've always done a little bit of that for a little over a decade now. And then about, I would say, 9 to 10 years ago, I got into yoga. And initially, and that was kind of when yoga kind of became a big boom, at least here in America. It seemed like yoga, went from, oh, what is that, to it was a household, phrase the next day. And I enjoyed yoga and it did help my spine at the time. But like many things, too much flexibility is not necessarily good for areas that are injured. Again, hypermobility can a lot of times be a detriment versus something good for you, versus focusing more on spinal stability. So the yoga definitely helped me increase the flexibility that I was lacking at the time, but I felt like I became too flexible and was trying to make my spine, that again has these injuries, go through too great a range of motion. And then kind of learned that, oh yeah, I need a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of strength, and then a lot of stability is really the key.
So how would you define stability?
The stability I got from, again, learning Pilates, of learning, how to properly engage my core, to, because again, people disagree or agree. Your core, to me, and its biggest number one job is not to be able to crunch or to, twist or anything. Your core's biggest job is to resist twist and resist folds. It's, again, think about anytime you pick something up, you don't want to instantly have that pull you over. You want to have the core strength to be able to stabilize your spine and be able to stand up straight while you pick something up.
Oh, I see. Okay. Because what I was asking was, how do you define it? Like, how you define the concept of stability, which it sounds like you were saying your stability, like when you say stability, you mean your ability, your core's ability to resist whatever it's doing and keep your spine upright, basically.
Yeah, to resist the spine from moving, bending, twisting. It's keeping it in proper alignment.
You did mention a concept that I don't think I've ever heard of, which is being too flexible. Were you saying too flexible in just an injured area, or just in general, it's possible to be too flexible?
In general, yeah, it's definitely, and I would say, especially for women, I tend to notice it more. But I would say probably, a quarter of the people that I see have some hypermobile joints in some area. And hypermobility, again, it sounds great and it looks great. You'll see these, people online or on Instagram that are doing these amazing bends, twists, and all that kind of stuff. And that is great, but I will almost guarantee every single one of them, if you go ask them, how do your joints feel in certain areas? Especially the areas that they're hypermobile in. They'll be like, oh, they're kind of stiff, they're kind of this, they're kind of that, they hurt. We used to have, when I went through my yoga training, we had a yoga instructor that always talked about the girls that were typically the hypermobile ones. And he's like, listen, ladies, we save our joints to smoke after class. We're not smoking them in class. So he was talking about, don't rely on your joint to go into a fold, because the premise, again, of yoga is to stretch the muscles and stretch in through the ligament to an extent, versus just relying on the fact that you've got such a hypermobile joint that you can just fold flat instantly without actually stretching anything.
How would you know if you're too flexible? I mean, I know I'm not even close to that. I'm not a flexible guy, but I'm like, now I'm kind of curious. I'm like, what would be like a good, healthy amount of flexibility?
So two big key areas that are pretty quick to notice. And again, if someone is hypermobile in one or two areas, you can kind of start to look at other areas and be like, oh, I bet you're probably hypermobile in multiple areas. Is if you extend your arm out, a lot of times you'll see, like, my arm goes out completely straight. Yours looks to go out pretty straight. You'll see people that when they fully extend their arm, the elbow bends almost up. It kind of looks like their arm bends too far. Same thing with the knees. Whenever someone stands up, it'll almost look like their knee goes back some.
Kind of like an ostrich.
Yep.
Like the ostrich legs.
Yep. So that's people that have hypermobility. And again, it can be absolutely great, but unfortunately, throughout those people's lives, they've kind of relied on their joints to move them throughout their life. And they've not had to learn, and I'm not saying all, but most of them have not had to learn how to properly engage their muscles to do movements, because their joint can just automatically do the movement for them. What ends up happening is they rely on that and they wear their joint out. You can think of your joint as more of like a robot. The more a robot or the more a mechanical piece moves, it eventually is going to erode and break down over time. Versus muscles, they rebuild very quick. So if you're using your muscles to build, yeah, you know, like when we do weightlifting, you are tearing your muscles, but your body quickly repairs your muscles and then it gets bigger and stronger. Doesn't happen really with joints. There is some repair, but the more you wear your joint out, eventually then you're going to need a joint replacement. And so
And
that's kind of what hypermobile people are doing, is they're wearing their joints out faster because they're relying on them more than their muscles.
man, you're blowing my mind over here. There's a lot of stuff that I've like actually been curious about this stuff for a while. And so you say you're wearing out your joints. Are you talking about the cartilage in your joints?
Yeah, the cartilage of your joints. And again, especially moving through an excessive range of motion, the ligaments can kind of move around a little too much. So it just ends up wearing the entire area down. And again, big key areas that you'll see are hips, knees, elbows, and shoulders, which, you know, are big areas anyways that tend to wear out pretty fast in normal people as well. But
So then so I'm like that's one of the areas that, like, I mean, I know so many men that are in their 60s that their joints are worn down to nothing. And I'm super curious, what do you think is some of the activities that people do that end up wearing down their knees, and what would possibly be some preventative measures they could, or things they could avoid doing to try to preserve some cartilage in their knees?
you know, for the most part, I would say, you know, a large portion of the population, it's honestly just going to be strength training to, again, build some muscle mass to help support the joints. You know, your knee, I would be hard pressed to decide which one's worse, your knee joint or your shoulder joint, because your knee joint is essentially a super unstable joint. You know, a ball and socket like your hip, that's one of the most stable joints because the femur is encapsulated in the socket of the hip joint. So it stays pretty good. Rarely is it going to come out of alignment, and it's supported by the structure itself. Then it has the ligaments, the tendons, and the muscles that add extra support. Versus your knee joint of the femur and then the tib and fib coming down with the patella, it's really only supported by the ligaments going from top to bottom, and then the muscle on top of that. But it's a hyper unstable, if not one of the worst joints in the body, just because there's no structure. There's, again, nothing that one part fits into the other part that gives it stability. It's all ligament and muscle is the only stability of that joint. And kind of the same thing with the shoulder. I would probably rank knee joint worst joint of the body, shoulder joint second worst, because even though it is kind of a ball and socket, it's a very shallow socket, especially for the range of motion that a shoulder goes through. So again, it really requires the musculature and the tendons to keep it in proper alignment. So for most joints, again, most people who have no hypermobility, and even people with hypermobility, the best thing you can do is to actively move them through proper ranges of motion, and then also build up your muscular strength, because you can build up tendon strength to an extent, but really your muscular strength is going to be what helps to support and encapsulate those joints to give them as much stability as they can.
So then is doing like really deep, like ass to the grass kind of squats, is that bad for your knees or good for your knees?
Depends on the person. Depends on how you're built. You know, I can do that because I'm built to do that. But structurally, there are people who physically cannot do ass to grass. And that's kind of the beauty. That's probably one of the biggest things that I love about being in this field is I love a puzzle. So anytime I get a brand new person in there, I like to run them through kind of a range of different exercises to get a full assessment of them. and say, okay, yes, this is something that you are made to do, or, there are certain things that's just like, sorry, your body just isn't physically made to do this. We can improve upon it to, a great extent, but you may never be able to do this simply because your body, the hips, again, depending on how narrow your hips are, where the joint placement is and of the femur and everything, you may not be able to get ass to grass. It's great to work towards that, and not necessarily to work towards that with 300 pounds on your back, but to just physically be able to do that with your own body weight. Yeah, absolutely, highly recommend.
Thank you so much for watching the podcast so far. These are a lot of fun to make. The main mission I have behind making this podcast is that I want to make sure that you have the information and the tools that you need to maintain an active and healthy and injury-free lifestyle for as long as possible. We're going to keep on making these. If you think that you know anybody that will also get a lot of benefit from the information in this interview, please do them a huge favor and share this video with them. Thank you. But if you can do it, it's probably okay.
If you can, everything with, I would say, again, I hate to throw out blanket statements here because there's always exceptions to every rule. You should try to be able to go through full ranges of motion with at least your body weight, as full a range of motion as you can. So, ass to grass from standing to butt on the ground with your squats, full ranges of motion with your shoulders, every which way that you can. Every joint should be able to theoretically work from one extreme range of motion to the other.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that's a relief, because I've been doing I do like ass, like I split it up for my squat routine. It's like one day I'll do like parallel, like heavier, and then another day I'll do like ass to the grass, like, and I'll pause just to make sure I really got all the way down there and then come up. And I'm doing it with like maybe 70 pounds of difference between the threshold of angles. And so I'm like, okay, I was like, dude, I don't want to be doing that for the next 5 years. And then turning out I was doing all this horrible damage to my knees or something like that.
Yeah, and that, what you just said is actually great. That's how I would recommend, if you are going to try and train through extreme ranges, again, do not rack your squat bar with your max weight and try to go ass to grass if you've never done that before. Definitely, again, start with body weight, then start adding a little bit of weight, at a time, and work your way up to it. That's a big thing with just weight training and physical training in general, is we are very impatient beings. We want what we want right now. We want to be able to deadlift 500 pounds now. Why should I have to slowly build up to it? And that's not how the human body works. Muscles, they build up and it takes a certain amount of time. Well, then ligaments, because they get so much less blood flow to them, they take even longer for muscles. So a lot of times, muscularly, we could go up, 20 pounds in our bench press or our squat after a few weeks, but really you should wait a few weeks even longer so that the ligaments then can build up their strength to be able to handle that, because even though the muscle can, the ligaments haven't built up the strength. So it's very, very slow training. It's one of the things that it's the hardest thing to make people understand who don't have an extensive background in any kind of physical training or are not trainers themselves. It doesn't happen overnight. And the best piece of advice I can give every single person on this planet that is a blanket statement is little bits of progression over long periods of time will make life changes that you will keep forever. That's the best thing you can do. Don't go into a gym and think, oh, I'm going to kill it, go as hard as I can for 6 weeks, and that's going to get me ripped. I would rather see someone come into the gym, work at a moderate pace that actually is sustainable for them to maintain and do. That's going to keep them less likely to be injured, and then to work that for the rest of their life.
Right. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's absolutely about habits. And I'm not like a huge Tony Robbins fan, but he occasionally says some things that I think are interesting. And he says, one of the quotes that he said that I liked was, people overestimate what they can get done in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can get done in 10 years. and
Absolutely.
you can make huge transformations in habits. And I mean, a year can seem like a long time, but it's really not. I mean, we burned through those suckers. There's so many ups and downs. And you know, another one that's, you know, that a lot of people struggle with is weight management. They want to lose weight, like they want to be just burning pounds off. And it's like, you know, you didn't get fat overnight. You're not going to lose that fat overnight. It's gonna be a gradual process, just like the one that got you there. It just won't be as full of as much cake and fun and all the like things that, you know.
Yeah. Well, and you know, on that note, and I've not really talked about it a whole lot here lately with a lot of my clients or followers, but back in December, I weighed the heaviest I've ever weighed. I weighed 220 pounds. And
Shit, actually that's where I was at. I mean, I've already gotten down from that. What do you weigh now?
As of yesterday, I weigh 181. So I've lost almost 40 pounds since December. So over about 7 months.
7 months. That's pretty damn good, actually. I mean, how strict was your dieting?
At first, I was very strict with it. But again, it wasn't super sustainable. Essentially, kind of what I've done is I do what is called a zigzag diet. So I only lift weights about 3 days a week now. So on days that I lift weights or do strength training, I'll up my calories from my base that I know I should have by about 200 calories. And on days that I'm doing cardio or doing, you know, mobility training, stuff like that, I'll cut my calories from my base by about 200 calories. So I'm fluctuating about 400 calories from day to day. And that has allowed me to still eat kind of whatever I want. I just know that I can only have X amount of calories of whatever it is I'm eating. So I'm still, you know, yes, I'm avoiding having pizza 6 days a week. Do I still eat pizza? Absolutely. You know, this week I was kind of craving something different. So I made chicken tikka marsala with white rice and all the goodies.
Ooh, fancy.
You know, little things like that, though, of again, really just focusing on my portion control and my calories is what has kept me able to do it in the long run. And the big thing I will say too, because it's all about finding out what your triggers are. When I want to eat horrible, and I told my clients this too. Do I like McDonald's? Absolutely. Do I eat it every day? No. But if I drink, even if it's 1 or 2 drinks, I want the worst fast food, salty, greasy, all that kind of stuff.
That was what I was going to ask is drinking. Because you know, like in bodybuilding, I mean, like they're super anti-alcohol if you're like in strict bodybuilding. But it's like, I'm like, I kind of like to drink whiskey. So what do you typically drink then?
So I drink typically tequila or vodka. I'm a big martini person, or I love a margarita or tequila on the rocks. And at first, again, because I know it's a trigger, I went super strict and I went 2 months, no alcohol, period. But I know myself that I have to do that. When I did bodybuilding back in my early 20s and did amateur bodybuilding, I quit drinking for 1.5 years because I knew in order to get to the shape that I needed to, I had to do that. I'm not looking to get in that crazy a shape again. So I allow myself to drink, but typically I allow myself 1, maybe 2 days a week to drink, and I only allow myself 1 to 2 drinks each day.
Okay. So you're not going full send.
Yeah.
I was about to say, you're worse than me. I only drink one night a week when I do, but it's definitely more than 2 drinks. But I will say this: when I do get my cheat meal in, because I already know my pattern I'm going to be in is like the area that I hang out in Seoul. It's like, all right, I'm going to bounce between a couple places. I'm going to just drink whiskey straight. But at some point, I know there's a pizza place that's open until like 1 a.m. and I'm getting a slice there at 12:45. And I'm going to feel bad about it at the time, but I'm going to get it.
And again, that's not to say over the past 6 or 7 months, have I had nights and stuff where I've gone out and I've drank way more than 2 drinks? Absolutely.
Oh, I was saying, okay,
I just
so
got back from Spain from 11 days over in Spain. I drank a lot in Spain, but I also worked very hard before I got to Spain so that I could let my hair down, let loose.
You were putting some deposits in the account so you could withdraw them, so you could have your paella and your sangria.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been to Spain, and I don't want to talk about that because now I'm going to want to travel. Actually, I'm pretty traveled out. I've been traveling, or I traveled to where was I? Oh, Italy. That was where I was at. That was probably one of the best places I've ever been, actually. But that's for a different podcast.
Exactly.
Now, so is there anything in particular about the way that you do Pilates training or any of the other kind of training that's particularly unique?
Yeah, so I bring in a lot of my background, and to kind of break it down, there's essentially 2 big distinctions in the Pilates community. There is contemporary Pilates, which to me is what Joseph started with back on the Isle of Man when he's in an internment campus. That's when he was learning, he was creating, he was having these people do these different exercises and really kind of learning how those exercises affected people with injury and stuff like that to help build, these men back up. And quick little side note, that is one of the biggest things I want to make understood about Pilates, that so many men, at least here in America, and I imagine around the world, have a misconception of. Similar to yoga, they think, oh, Pilates, that's a woman's thing. If I hear that one more time, I will vomit. I have had CrossFitters come in who do CrossFit 7 days a week, and I kicked their ass in reformer Pilates. It was made by a man during a world war for men, just to set the record straight. So any guy out there who's listening is like, oh, I don't want to do Pilates, that's a woman's thing. There's your piece.
Well, so I mean, to jump in, I know I'm 100% with you, man.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this, is because I come from such super intensively masculine activities of being an army officer and fucking just, I'm gonna squat my ass off, and I'm gonna punch bags real hard, and I'm gonna do all these like high intensity, quote unquote, macho things. And those are great. Those are fun. It's good for getting some energy out of you. But at the same time, it's like, I need to balance some of this stuff out, and I need to look at some of these other fitness traditions that are a little less, overtly aggressive, and integrate them. And it's like, I know that, like, if my back's starting to feel bad, I'm going to do some yoga. If I'm like, I notice some other movement, I'm like, probably going to do some other kind of mobility thing. And it's like, I need to start integrating some of this other stuff and reaching out to these other areas that I don't traditionally think of. And like, I was like, yeah, no, I'm totally on board. It's like, no, this is not just for females. It's like, we all have bodies and we need to treat them well if we want to keep on using them. Otherwise, just grinding them down and having the knee problems on the joints that we're talking about and all that other stuff.
Yep. And so that's I'm very glad to hear that. That's, again, it's a big misconception I still feel around most of the world, is that it's very much a woman's kind of exercise. And I have a feeling that comes from the second half. So again, the first kind of distinction of Pilates was that kind of contemporary, working on building muscle in people that have been injured, helping injured veterans and all that kind of stuff. Well, then shortly after the war ended, he moved to New York, and he moved into the New York City ballet building, at one of the floors I learned a long time ago. But because he was in the building that hosted the New York City Ballet, he started talking to some of the dancers, and they were like, oh, I'm injured here, da, da, da. And he created what is considered classical Pilates. And classical Pilates, I feel like, is what most people think of when they think of Pilates. Classical Pilates tends to be a lot lighter spring, and that's what we use to create resistance, is spring. So it tends to be lighter spring. It tends to be a very particular routine, if not the same routine a lot of times. And it's all about, stretching, lengthening. It brings in more of that aspect of Pilates, which can seem very easy. I have taken a little bit of classical Pilates, and let me tell you, when you're having to be that precise and that accurate, doing things on very light spring is very hard because it requires so much more focus. So you have the contemporary Pilates and the classical Pilates. I learned contemporary style. I have never taken any classical training. It is something that eventually would interest me, but I'm in a very small area, so I'd have to travel to do classical training. But I bring in a lot of my background. I bring in my bodybuilding background, my yoga background. I did another modality called animal flow that I'm trained in, so I'll bring in some of that. So I bring in lots of athletic mobility type training into my Pilates. And so a lot of times people see what I'm teaching, they're like, oh, well, that's not, there's always, I feel like every particular area of fitness, there's always people that are diehard purists to a certain form, and then those that work outside the purist form. I work outside the purist form, so a lot of times I'll get flack and they'll say, oh, what you're teaching isn't Pilates. And my view on it is what I'm teaching is Pilates because I use the principles of Pilates to do the movements and training. But I tend to like to work, with athletes, or on the other end of the spectrum, I love to work and do PT type stuff. I love to rebuild and help people gain their, mobility and strength back, simply because that's what I've done with my fitness background. My typical clients here in the area, I live in an area that the average age is about 55 to 60. So I do tend to, most of my clientele is older, but occasionally I'll get in some professional golfers and tennis players and stuff like that, or people visiting. And then I've got a few, I'd say probably about 25% of my clientele is a younger clientele that we do a lot of the more advanced crazy stuff with. But that's kind of my background, and how I teach it is I'm contemporary, but even then I'm kind of outside the contemporary Pilates spectrum because I bring in so much. Again, I don't think anything, weightlifting, yoga, all the modalities of fitness, you should not do just one the rest of your life, because you're not changing it up for your body. Your body needs constant change to constantly improve. That's why I tend to like to blend a lot of things. Certain times, yeah, I'll go back to the original routines and teach those. And then I'm like, oh, well, I learned how we can do deadlifts using the reformer today. So that's what we're going to practice today.
That is the perfect toss up for my next question, which is if somebody is, like a diehard, like they're into either powerlifting or bodybuilding, but like those, those sort of heavy linear type of movements, what are some like Pilates principles or some advice that you'd use to integrate into their their bodybuilding routine or what have you, to sort of improve performance and joint health and stuff like that?
So again, one of the best things that Pilates teaches is that core stability, which you absolutely need to do super heavy squats or deadlifts, because if you are not engaging your core properly, you're going straight into your back and you're going to end up injuring yourself. The other thing is that Pilates really focuses a lot on your breathing and your concentration, which I feel like that's where kind of weightlifting, coming from that background as well, gets a bad rep of people say, oh, again, if you've got a bad back, don't squat. That's absolutely not true. Don't squat like most people squat, because I feel like when most people squat, they're not paying enough attention to their body. And again, properly engaging their core to create stability, using their breathing properly. It's the thing I think Pilates can help with your average weightlifters and stuff, is to help bring more awareness to their body of how they're moving, how they're breathing, where they should be concentrating or engaging in that kind of aspect. And to me, that's really what I feel like it can help benefit so many other athletes, or people that are doing weightlifting and stuff like that. Is that it slows a lot of times people who are doing lots of ballistic or very fast movements through the entire range of motion, which they may not do when they're doing their active sport.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's something that I'm kind of interested in, because it's like myself, I've done, here and there, I've done quite a few different sports. In high school, I was a discus thrower, for track and field. So that's very rotational, core centric. Everything, everything goes through your core. Now I've been getting more involved in doing martial arts and Muay Thai and stuff like that. That's very similar. And it seems like this whole principle of everything starts with the core is like, I'm at a loss to think of anything you do that isn't that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I never really thought of that, but I'm like, I think.
But exactly, we don't actively think of it that way. That Pilates is the first of all the trainings I've ever done that has said activate your core first before you do a movement. When really that's what we should be doing our entire lives. That should be like first day kindergarten doing any kind of, gym activity. Okay, we're going to teach you how to activate your core so that then you can go run. We're going to teach you how to activate your core before you throw a discus. We're going to teach you how to activate your core before you do anything. Because if, again, you have that stability there, you can create so much more power. And it's kind of, probably for like a lot of the martial arts, one of the things that I've heard, not having done martial arts, is you're pulling kind of energy up from the ground to say, throw someone or to throw a punch. A punch doesn't start in your hand or in your shoulder. Your punch starts down at your feet, of grounding down through the ground, pulling that energy up to then send that energy out to throw a punch. Well, what connects the upper body and the lower body is your midsection, your core. So if you don't have that ability to create that integration, and you're pulling up from the ground, but you're not engaging your core, then you've just lost the energy you're trying to pull up to throw into that punch.
Right. Right. So the stability piece, real, like that, the huge, that linkage. So this is a little to deviate from the sports and working out aspect of the big thing that a lot of us deal with in the modern age. Is we spend most of our day on our ass in front of a computer, typically at the office.
Absolutely.
What is some advice that you would give to people that are sort of have to spend most of their day behind a desk? What can we do to sort of improve spine and core health so that we're not, getting whatever debilitating issues from that?
So the first one, again, it would kind of depend on your office. Actually, kind of again, in between graduating college into owning my own studio, I did a number of odd jobs. One of them is I was an accountant for a year, and hated that job. Just FYI, me and numbers, not the best of friends. But I traded my desk chair out for a big exercise or stability ball. I sat on that. That forces you to sit more upright. It also decreases the amount of pressure that just sitting creates on the spine. So if you are capable of doing that and getting a alternate to a regular desk chair, highly recommend a stability ball. Getting up and moving. One of the things that I did is I would set a timer, and even now when I have my days that I work on computer or do stuff like that, I set a 5-minute timer, or I set a timer for at least 5 minutes every hour. Every hour I get up for at least 5 minutes. I'll walk around, I'll do a little bit of movement, do any stretching that I need to. And then again, that, cue that I give my students in class whenever they're exercising in class, you can do that seated. It's just, take a break, sit up nice and tall, taking a big inhale. On that exhale out, imagine like you're trying to button up a really tight pair of pants so that you're doing that stomach vacuum and engaging your core. Little things like that are really great, because the kind of physics behind the stomach vacuum is when you create that stomach vacuum, you're engaging the core, you're squeezing everything in. What that does to the spine is that helps to prop the spine up, and it actually, you'll notice that you feel like you get a little bit taller, and you actually truly do get a little bit taller, because it takes the pressure of supporting the spine off of the disc and puts it into your muscles. So you actually lift up and you relieve the pressure on those discs
I can
because
feel
you're
it.
letting musculature, support you and lift you up.
Okay, I can feel that. That actually does actually feel better. I'm gonna have to start doing that more because it's I can feel that kind of the little bit of like an elongation or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long car rides, long plane rides, stuff like that, or sitting in a chair for super long. Any bit of movement you can do to get up and move around a little bit. Again, it depends on how lax your office is. If you have your own actual office in an office, get down on the floor, do a little bit of stretching on the floor. But moving is the number one thing. We as a species are not made to sit in a desk chair for 8 hours and only get up to go eat and use the bathroom.
Yeah,
We
I
are
know.
made to move.
I know that's yeah, and it's not even that we're made, I mean, I've read a few books on this, and it's like it's not even necessary that we're made to like constantly be doing these high intensity things. It's like even if we just walk all day for hours and hours and walk all day picking seeds and berries and stuff.
Absolutely, that walking. I love Pilates. If I could only probably pick one exercise to do the rest of my life, walking would be it. That is the number one exercise our body was made to do. It's a great, thing for our full body health, helps with our posture, helps regulate our blood sugar so that we're not overeating, all that kind of stuff. I do lots of outside studying, but also do continued education. And one of the number one things that they have discovered of people that live in what's called blue zones. So that's zones around the world where people regularly live into their hundreds without, things like dementia or Alzheimer's or any, joint or physical maladies, is they walk a lot more every day than the average person does. Not that they're out there walking 10 miles, but they're out there walking about 3-4 miles a day.
What are some of some of those areas called, or some of those places?
There's one, I think it's Palto, California, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I was reading the article. There's one in California. I know there's, I think 2 over in Japan. There's one down in Costa Rica. If you, again, I can't remember all the names, but if you search blue zones, you should pull up a list. And again, some of the big things they said is they walked daily. They honestly, in every single one, drank wine daily. Granted, they did say they limited it to 1 glass, but they drank wine daily. They ate more of kind of a Mediterranean-ish kind of diet. And then they made sure to get proper sleep, the full kind of 8 hours of sleep.
I'm glad you mentioned the thing about drinking, because that is one of those weird ones that I've noticed whenever they interview quote unquote one of these like people that's like quote unquote the oldest person in the world. For some reason, they always say, "Oh yeah, I drank every day." And like we don't think of that as we think of that as being like such a bad thing, but it's like, and I don't know if that's necessarily like because they drank, they lived long, or because they had like this sort of and they're never like somebody who was like the some high stress position, like they were a CEO or they were like the king of something or whatever. They were always like had this very kind of very mellow life, very ordinary, but they seem to enjoy it. And I almost wonder if how much of that was due to their longevity was due to having kind of a low stress life where they weren't like going all nuts about stuff. But yeah, I think I was reading about, I was actually looking at a list similar to that about like old people that are very long lived. And one of the ones that I always thought was really interesting was Okinawa. Me being here in South Korea, Okinawa is quite close. And I'm also, in addition to being a podcaster, I'm a little bit of an amateur documentarian. And I was actually thinking about doing a trip out to Okinawa sometime in the next year to do a documentary on sort of their longevity practices out there. And so I'm glad to hear that that's one of the things to look for is like, oh, they probably did go
I
walk.
want to say Okinawa was on that list again. I can't be sure.
I know it was. It was.
List 10 around the world of just different areas. I think there was only 1, maybe 2 in the entire United States, but I feel like there was 2 in Japan, I think Costa Rica or somewhere in Central America was
Mhm.
one. A few places in Europe were some. And again, it's just they to me the key to life is moderation. Again,
Mm.
even with Pilates, too
Mhm.
much Pilates not good for you. You need to change up your routines all the time. Do moderate amounts of everything, and I guess that includes drinking.
I
So
got I've got to be honest though. I'm surprised that there's any American cities anywhere on that list, because whenever I think of America, I just think of like the most unhealthy place on the planet. But I don't live there anymore, so I don't know.
we are a place of two extremes. We are either so healthy that we make it not healthy really anymore because we stress so much about it,
Mhm.
or we are just the unhealthiest people eating whatever we want, doing whatever we
It's a
want.
fair point to do. We are a nation of massive contrasts.
Yeah, like versus like again, just coming back from Spain, they're sitting there having 3 4 hour long lunches and dinners,
Oh, it's
drinking and eating
beautiful.
and all that kind of stuff, but they don't put the same pressure, I feel like, on health over there that we do, which I think is what makes them healthier. They also walk a lot. Like I was averaging, I think, 5 miles a day walking. So again, walk, try to live that low stress lifestyle that we were talking about. All that kind of stuff is great.
That was one of the things I thought was so weird about like being in Italy. Everyone there was so thin, but when you think of Italian food, you just think of a giant pile of carbs.
Oh
And it
yeah.
and I'm like, and at the time I've kind of transitioned away from it because I wasn't really able to sustain it. You can maintain a keto diet, more power to you. I can't. But at the time I was trying to cut out my carbs, and I'm like, how are all these people so skinny? All they do is eat carbs and and I'm like, okay, cool. Well, clearly there's something I'm missing here. But then they would do that. They would have these ridiculously long meals, and then they would eat, and then they'd be like, all right, well, it's time. You're like, okay, we're done. But we're gonna have we're gonna drink coffee for another like 30 minutes. And I'm like, I thought we needed to leave. But it's a beautiful, beautiful way of living the Mediterranean. We're gonna sit around and eat and drink all night, every night. I'm like, oh man, that's cool.
Absolutely.
So then what else? So but now that we're in, this kind of you mean depending on the part of the world you're in, we're for the most part in a post COVID era where life has gone largely back to normal.
Yeah. We've
Largely.
gotten over it. COVID's canceled. So
I don't know. I mean, I don't, yeah. So depending on, yeah, exactly. Depending on where you are and the state you're in and all those other things. But now that we're sort of in the sort of new phase of the world, what's kind of like the next steps for you, and like what's the big projects you're working on?
so I am kind of very tardy to the party,
Mhm.
mostly because I hate technology. I just cannot work it very well. It's never been my forte. I am slowly transitioning to do a lot more online stuff. Again, I kind of got into it very late in the game as far as, building any kind of online presence.
Mhm.
And so I've been working on that a lot more. My goal over probably the next 6 months is to really up my game with that. I'm started doing YouTube videos more. I have a little YouTube series that I've started where I do about a 5 to 7 minute video where I break down a lot of the sequences that I'll post on my Instagram and how to do those sequences. My next goal from that is to actually start doing pre-recorded classes and to create like an on-demand type library where someone can subscribe and they'll have actual access to the classes that I teach to do whenever they want. Because I know a lot of times people don't always have their time schedule locked up with mine here on the East Coast. And I've gotten really big on my Instagram to where I've built and become part of this awesome community where I've met so many instructors all over the world that I stay in constant engagement with. There's lots in Australia. I'm starting to build more of a following in South Korea there, down into Brazil, over in Italy. I've started to build a following, and I want to be able to engage with these people more and start doing classes to where they can take them on their own time. And then eventually, I would love to start traveling and teaching and get to, travel and see so many places. This Spain trip was the first time I'd left the country since 2006. So it was well
Ooh,
overdue.
you need to get on it.
Yeah, so I would really like to start traveling and building myself more online and building my online presence more.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm glad you brought all that up. And of course, to the subscribers out there, I'm going to include all of your links in the description and all that other stuff. So anybody who wants to come out and find you, of course, will be able to, once they watch this video, it'll be, included. But no, that's great. No, I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the funny things about it is, we have to adapt. We're always having to adapt to the new technology. And then as we were getting started, even in this interview before I hit record, little things that were popping up that was like, oh, okay, they fixed this. So this is good. And it's like, I was podcasting, I was recording last year, and then I took a break from it because, the life kept on changing. We didn't know what was ever happening. And so I was like I was doing the podcast for a reason back then, and that kept on changing. And so I was like, I took a year off and now I'm doing it again. And now, of course, everything's already changed in a year. But no, that's cool, man.
And that is, I will say, I'm very much a glass half full kind of guy, or silver lining. COVID, absolutely horrible for the entire world, blah, blah, blah. One of the best things I think that came out of COVID is it did force a lot of us to go online, maybe late like I'm doing, or maybe you hit it right off when COVID first started. But I feel like so much of my business now, I thought initially would go online during COVID, and then once COVID was back, everyone would jump right back to being in classes, in person in the studio. And I think we realized that no, so much of what we can do online to make health and fitness more available to everyone. So again, it's just those of you out there that love to make excuses, because I know sometimes I do as well. Oh, I don't have time to go to a gym or go to a studio or go somewhere. Well, now we're right there in your home. All you have to do is bring us up on your computer or your phone or your TV or whatever, and you can do your fitness, whatever it is, anywhere now. And I think that's a great kind of silver lining that truly came out of the pandemic, was so much of the fitness community went online thinking again that, we'd only be on there during the pandemic. And then we're like, we can actually maintain this and add this in to, reach more people, which I think is great.
All right. And with that, I'm going to say we have completed our interview.
Yep.
All right,
awesome.
man.
Thank
All
you
right.
for having me.
No problem. All right. I want to thank you again for listening this far into the podcast. And even if that's all you do, I'm still immeasurably grateful. If you would like to go deeper into our mission of helping you maintain an active, healthy, and injury-free lifestyle, you can go ahead and subscribe to our mailing list at Dephender.com. On there, you'll receive exclusive content as well as special offers on upcoming products. Thank you.